When we consider editing our birds in flight images, the issues to consider are noise from our high ISO, almost certain to be essential. There's a possible need to crop to improve the composition. And in some cases, we have some bright highlights to deal with. In this case, the Pelican appeared unexpected while a 500mm lens was being used with a times-2 converter. I was looking to photograph much smaller water birds and the focal length was 944mm. This was a handheld shot. However, I was aware of the potential problems of camera shake. I was on my stomach and well braced with my elbows on the ground, so between my elbows and my body I'm forming a human tripod up to a point. So within Camera Raw you can see the crop that I have decided to make. The bird was quite large in the frame, but it's much better with the crop. But of course I was shooting with 1000 ISO, so I've got some noise to deal with and also those highlights. I'll hit the enter key to commit this. I have already adjusted the light and the color that I want. So I've done the global editing. What I need to do next is the highlights. Now sometimes to see if the highlights can be dealt with effectively, we can drop the exposure way down and we can see that we can do something to alleviate those highlights. I don't think they are too crucial, but we can certainly do something. I'll double click to reset that. I think it was set something around 15 or 20. That'll do. So all I would do here is to zoom in. Let's do the head first. And there we can begin to see the noise. So here I would be going to my masks for strategic editing. And in the past I've been going to objects and selecting the area that I want. Not too successful here, so I'm going to go straight to my brush. In the settings down here, in the light settings, I know what I want to do. I need to take the highlights well down, I need to take the exposure well down, and I need to use my brush with a low flow rate. There you can see the size of the brush, which I can adjust, as you know, with the square keys next to the letter P on the keyboard. But there you can see that I can actually do a fair amount of work on the highlights on the head of the bird. Now we need to be careful, and as I always say in these situations, I'm always rushing because I'm conscious of using up all this video time. And whilst I don't mind showing what I'm doing, I don't want to bore everyone to death. But you can see here, with a bit of care, we can soon have those highlights done. So we end up with an image open in Photoshop that has some impact. None of the highlights are sufficient to detract from the image itself. Now here's an image similar to the previous. It's been through Adobe Camera Raw and the noise suppression. It was shot with a 400 ISO, which enabled a 0.002 of a second shutter speed. I've got a nice sharp shot, but as you can see, not very well framed within the boundary. So I've got a problem here in cropping to a much better composition. Now if you were a camera club worker and you join in with their competitions, we can all appreciate natural history rules and what they try to achieve. But they're also a sledgehammer to crack a nut in many cases. Because here I want to move the bird and create my composition, and some would say that prevents this from being entered into natural history, but I'm okay with that. I'd much rather have a better image to present than put this into a competition it's not welcome. I'll save it and put it into an open competition instead, because I'd rather have a better image, in my opinion. Now to achieve this, what I'm first going to do is to sample the blue colour of the sky, because that's going to help me be in a nice blue sky. But I'm going to sample at the top of the bird and the bottom. So if I pick up my eyedropper tool, I'm not too concerned about the settings along the top of the screen. I'm going to click just between those feathers at the top, and you'll see that it the blue appears as the foreground in our colour picker. If I go just below the bird at the base and hold the Alt key and click, then the background blue is set. There's not a great deal to choose between those two colours. Sometimes we may have the top darker than the bottom. The reason I'm sampling close to the bird is because I'm going to put in a sky behind this using exactly the same colours. And it's going to match better. Well, that's the cunning plan. The next thing is to select the bird. I'm going to do that with Select Subject. I think it shouldn't have a great deal of difficulty here, but sometimes it may. I'm looking between the feathers and the wings, and you can see I've got a little bit of a problem in various places. Now what we can do in those situations is sometimes to hit Ctrl D to remove it, go back to the Select menu, and this time let's try selecting the sky. Sometimes we can make a better selection by choosing either the subject or the sky. There you can see it seems to have done a better job. I will look very closely up here, and if I feel it needs a little more effort, I doubt it does given what we're about to do, so I'm going to live with what that selection is giving me. But I do want to soften the edge of that selection just a tiny bit. I need to make a selection of one of the selection tools, and then the selector mask appears at the top of the screen. I'm going to click that. Now you can see when it pops on screen I've got the view mode here set to black and white, which is my favourite for most of the time. The feather, all I really need is, I think about 1 pixel is going to be enough. I'm going to output this to a selection, so I'm going to go back out. I'll hit Ctrl 0 because what I'm going to do next is to, as we can see the marching ants around the outer edge, I've got the sky selected here. So just for the moment, I'm going to go back to my select menu and inverse it. So I've just got the bird selected. Ctrl J will copy that bird to a new layer. Now what I could do is to turn this layer off because I don't actually need it. But what I'd like to do is to create extra canvas, but I'm not sure how much I want. So what I tend to do is to try to overcompensate because I can always crop back. So let's go to Image and Canvas Size. Set my measurements to inches, which I'm a bit more comfortable with. Doesn't matter where the bird is for the moment because we can move him or her in a moment. So I'm going to add say 6 inches on the width and 6 inches on the height, and OK, and then Ctrl 0. Now I think if I select the bird and the move tool, I can now move the bird into a nice position and I can consider a crop. So let's try to do the crop that I would have liked to have had in the first place. So there we have the bird coming onto the screen, moving into the picture. We could, once we hit the tick, we could select the bird with our free transform tool, Ctrl T. So if we wanted to just give the bird a little bit more of an angle of attack and adjust the bird, you can see the sort of things we can do. I'm going to hit the tick to commit that at the top of the screen. But now I'm going to create a new blank layer. Down at the bottom of the layers, I'll drag it beneath my bird because now I can apply the blue colour that I sampled from the layer we've got turned off on the right hand side. So over to the toolbox, I'm going to select my gradient tool. From the options at the top of the screen, I want this option here, basics, and foreground to background. We can't see a great deal of difference. Now I can start just where I made my first sample, somewhere around there, and drag down to around about the position I made my final sample. Now, if I just click the other layer, we can evaluate what we have. Now, because I've already burnt my boats with the natural history photographers, what I've done is to create a new blank layer. I went to my colour picker on the left hand side, clicked the foreground blue, and I moved the selection to create a darker colour, so that when I created another gradient, you can see I've got a better, darker colour at the top than I have at the bottom. We can live with this for a while, save it as a Photoshop file, but there's the original background. I could have darkened that, of course, in Adobe Camera Raw, but here I've drawn it in nicely with that gradient. And if we zoom into our image, sometimes when we've added computer generated colour, it doesn't match perfectly with the photographic quality of the image, so we're going to have some pixels in the image. So what I would do with my layer here, I would be adding a little amount of noise. We don't want too much, but if we go to Filter, Noise, Add Noise, it's asking me if I want to rasterize this to continue to work on it, and I do, so I'll click to rasterize, because all I need here is about 1% of Gaussian monochrome noise, and as you can see at this size, it just balances very nicely with the photographic elements of the image. Now, of course, my advice is to save this as a Photoshop file to retain all those layers. It's surprising how many times we can get up the next day and change our mind. Well, we can easily make a change while we have those layers, but of course at some stage we may wish to flatten the image to finish. And I'll see you next time.